Today we're going to talk about the future of third base for the Detroit Tigers. All today on Locked On Tigers.
You are Locked On Tigers, your daily Detroit Tigers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of Locked On Tigers. I'm, of course, your host, Scott Bentley. Today is Monday, November 13th, 2023. Thank you so much for making Locked On Tigers your first listen every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This episode is brought to you by Jace Medical. Empower yourself when you purchase a Jace case, providing you with a personal supply of 5 antibiotics that treat 50 plus infections. Get yours today at jacemedical.com. That's JASCmedical.com. Alrighty, well, welcome back, everybody. Hope you had a fantastic weekend and a happy Monday to all. So we are going to today discuss third base. Now, we talked about it a little bit at the end of last week, but that was more of like half of one segment. And I really think that this is a conversation where when it's big enough to where we can take, just break down its entirety, right? And take as much time as we need. We have plenty of options on the free agent market. We have plenty of in-house options that people are discussing. We have obviously the trade route. There's a lot to discuss when it comes to what, not even like long-term, like 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road is going to look like. What's third base going to look like in 2024? I think that there's a lot of question marks surrounding that. So we're going to go very much way more in depth than we did in the slight conversation we had about third base last week today. And yeah, that's going to be today's show. There is a big week ahead of us, however, and I want to make that very clear. So this week is going to be a lot of discussions had involving your Detroit Tigers. On November 14th, so what is that, Tuesday, is the day to protect players from the Rule 5 draft. So there will be some additions to the 40-man roster, and the Tigers' 40-man roster is at 40. So that means that some players are going to get removed from the 40. So we have more decisions to be made in that regard on who to add and who to get rid of. We'll have that conversation on Tuesday's show about like who I think should get protected and whatnot. And then obviously once the decision is made, we'll recap the decisions. But then later this week on Thursday and Friday, we have the non-tender deadline is Friday. So that is the decision for, arbitration eligible players. Are you going to tender them? Are you going to non-tender them, etc.? We have that. And then on Thursday, we have the qualifying offer accept or reject deadline throughout baseball. Now, that doesn't directly affect the Tigers too terribly much, but it does affect some free agents that are going to be in the class. This is I couldn't even tell you the last time the Tigers had a qualifying offer. Does anyone remember? Who's the last QO we had? Was it Verlander? I feel like that's impossible. It can't be that long ago. Maybe Castellanos got one. I'm trying genuinely. It's been a while. And, we've gotten to a point amongst baseball where the qualifying offer is really only handed out by teams to players that they know are going to reject them, right? Like players who are about to enter free agency and are fixing to make a lot of money, multiple years, etc. So we'll see what happens. That will affect the free agent market, depending on if we get some acceptors in there. But I'd imagine a majority of them are going to decline, as they usually do. So we'll see. We'll see what happens with that. But that will be, again, like a league-wide discussion that'll kind of determine who's going to be available and who is not. But yeah, a lot of teams mostly just want the draft pick compensation these days. So that's the week ahead. So we have a lot to go over. Obviously, like I said, in the immediate future after today's episode, we're going to be talking a lot about who is going to get protected from the Rule 5 draft, who's going to get let go from the 40-man roster. And then obviously later in the week, I'm just going down the schedule I just explained. We can move on. Today we're going to talk about third base. With third base, there are a lot of options at the Detroit Tigers' disposal, which is good, right? Disposal. Good. We're happy about that. There's a lot of options. However, there's also how do I word this? If they stand pat and just go into next season and the plan is just Vierling, we can start there. If the plan is just like Vierling, Ibanez, etc. at third base next year, I will be pretty upset and pretty just like disappointed, really more so than anything. Vierling proved that he can play a decent third base. I'm not going to deny that. And I wanted him to play third, right? You can go back and listen to the June and July episodes. I was very much one of the early advocates for him playing third. And I'm glad that he did. We now know that he can play all three outfield positions, mostly the corners, but if you really need him to play center, I guess he can, and third base. And that's a valuable asset to have on your roster. Does it mean that I think Matt Vierling should be the everyday third baseman? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And Andy Ibanez, again, had a really solid year. Do I want Andy Ibanez to be the everyday third baseman for this baseball team next year? No, I do not. I'm fine if Andy Ibanez is on the roster again, more than fine. Again, he had a really good year. Don't want him manning third base for 160 games. And maybe they do a platoon thing where it's one of those two guys, Vierling / Ibanez, and then it's Zach McKinstry against righties. Hopefully not for the whole season. I want some attempt to get better at a position where you were quite literally one of the worst in all of baseball in terms of production out of that position. The Tigers were in the bottom of production out of third base this entire year. They were just flipping around in the bottom three, depending on what week you looked at, all season. Obviously, Nick Maton didn't work out. They chose not to bring back Jamer. We'll talk about Jamer here in a second. There's a lot of decisions that were made that got us to this point, and we got nothing for production out of the position. And I just can't really get behind or accept or support the decision of, oh, let's just run it back and we'll try some different people this time. No, thank you. Okay? Valuable guys to have on the roster. McKinstry, Ibanez, Vierling. Going to be fine if those three guys are getting ABs for the Tigers next year. Going to be more than fine with that. Doesn't mean I want them to be penciled in as starters most nights. So what's the alternative? Obviously, free agency has begun. We're in the thick of the offseason now. That is a place where most people are going to turn. I've said it a ton of times. I'm going to continue to reiterate that this free agent class for hitters is weak. It's a solid one for pitching. It's a very weak class for hitters. Now, one of the very few, quote unquote, bigger money free agents is a third baseman. So we're going to have the Matt Chapman conversation, obviously. But it's one of those situations where it gets pretty thin pretty quick. This is not 2021 shortstop class. Well, I guess that's kind of a salty wound, I'd imagine, actually, at this point. But you get my point. This is not a class where, it's five guys who have made all-stars deep at third base, and it's five guys in their prime or whatnot. Like, there's a couple of discussions we'll have today, and it gets thin fast. So let's have those discussions. Let's start with Matt Chapman, all right? And we will talk about Matt Chapman right after I tell you about our friends over at Jace Medical. I just learned today through Jace Medical that you can get a 1-year supply of ED medication. You don't have to worry about whether or not you can refill your generics for Cialis, Viagra, etc., and all of those prescriptions. And this is possible because of our friends at Jace Medical. Go online right now at jacemedical.com to receive your 12-month supply on your daily medication. Remember to use promo code LOCKEDON at checkout for a discount as well. A verified customer had this to say about Jace Medical, quote, "I am thankful for this service. Supply chain issues caused me to cut pills in half. I ordered most of my daily meds with a year supply. I also ordered an antibiotic kit, and I feel secure now. Prices are lower than local pharmacies. I highly recommend this for everyone." Again, that's a verified customer through Jace Medical. So if you or someone you love would love to have some peace of mind by having a year's supply of any daily medication, go to jacemedical.com to see if it's offered for you. Remember to use promo code Locked On for $20 off of your purchase. All right, everybody, welcome back here. Segment 2 of Locked On Tigers. I appreciate you all for tuning in, making us your first listen every single day. Shout out to the everydayers that do tune in every day. We will be back tomorrow. I already kind of laid out the week for you. We have a lot to discuss. All right, tomorrow's going to be a fun episode. So we're talking about third base, the future of it. We kind of talked about how we got to where we are, right? The Nick Maton acquisition, how it didn't work, and all the in-house options that were tried at third base last year. So now let's start talking about who we could possibly bring in to right that ship. Matt Chapman is obviously one that everybody has been asking me about for probably like a calendar year now, to be honest. Ever since it was kind of put on the radar that he was going to hit free agency this year. I can remember back in February getting questions about Matt Chapman, and they have not slowed down. Matt Chapman this past season had a 240 batting average, a 330 on base percentage, a 424 slug. He was worth 3.5 FWAR, had a 754 OPS with 17 home runs. And obviously, as he has been throughout his entire career, played borderline elite to elite defense for most of the season. So obviously, I want to preface this by saying, if I woke up tomorrow and the Detroit Tigers had signed Matt Chapman to a 3 or a 4 year deal, I would not be upset. Okay. We would come on the show. We would celebrate. We would talk about how they went out and they made a big money move. It's not my money. I want to preface it by saying this because I feel like I'm going to go down a road here and it's going to lead to me not sounding like I'm like pounding my fist on the table, advocating for us to bring in Matt Chapman at the same time. That's probably what a lot of this is going to sound like. But I just want to reiterate that he would be a massive, massive, massive upgrade over what we have. But he is a flawed player. And a lot of his value comes from defense. His last 3 seasons, he's 30 years old, by the way. Next year will be his age 31 season. His last 3 years, his OPS has been 717, 757, and 754. He has not eclipsed a 758 OPS since the COVID season and then pre-COVID season. Now, he had 27 home runs in 2021, 27 home runs in 2022, 17 home runs in 2023. That's also a little scary, just seeing a dip of that many home runs. But the profile is kind of a guy who you would associate somewhat with Scott Harris. I think there's a few differences, but as far as just purely the profile goes, this guy hits the ball incredibly hard. He was 100th percentile in hard hit rate, 98th in barrel percentage, 98th in average exit velocity. When he hits the ball hard. He also was in the 94th percentile in chase rate and the 78th in walk rate, which he had a walk rate of just under 11%, well above league average. Very, very solid number. So he draws walks and he hits the ball hard. Why on earth is his OPS below 760 for 3 years in a row with those kind of underlying numbers? He strikes out a lot. He swings and misses a lot. And he doesn't hit for a high batting average. There you go. That's the quick rundown. That's why a guy who had 27 home runs in back-to-back seasons had a 403 slug and a 433 slug. Do you know how hard it is to have 27 home runs and have a slugging percentage of barely over 400? That's like actually remarkable. That's they should study that in history classes. That's fascinating that's even possible. That you can approach a 30 home run season and almost have a slugging percentage of under 400. So not too much of an extra base guy. Not going to get you a ton of doubles, right? Not going to hit the ball in the gap. He's going to crush the ball for a home run. Or he is, again, like 240 batting average. It's not like he has the lowest batting average on the planet, but his career batting average is also 240. So that's exactly in line with about what you were going to get production-wise at the plate. Last season, he got off to an unbelievably hot start. He was maybe the best hitter in baseball going into the month of May. He had an 1,100 OPS in the month of March and April. Then he had a 585 in May, a 633 in June. In July, he popped back up for a 908 OPS. And then the rest of the season, August 532, September 632. He had a 664 OPS after the All-Star break, and that perfectly epitomizes Matt Chapman at the plate. He's going to draw his walks, absolutely, right? But in the same breath, he had 5 walks in August and 4 in September, but he had 20 in the month of July. He is a very, very, very inconsistent hitter. And my entire point, and he's a great defender. We don't have to go too much in depth on that. He is year in and year out. He will always be, until obviously the body starts to go or whatever, but like he will always be one of the best defenders at third base in the entire sport. And that is why he's going to give you 3 to 4 WAR, even with an OPS in the mid 700s. Okay. So that I cannot stress enough how great that value is. My thing with Chapman is the inconsistencies at the plate. And if this was a guy who was getting paid, I don't know, 15 mil a year, 12 to 15 AAV. Obviously, that's for, especially if you look at WAR, that's like a steal. And most people are going to be like, oh, yeah, that's great production. This is a weak free agent class, as I've said a million times. And I think, and I could be very wrong, we'll see what happens. I think that that's going to drive the price of Matt Chapman up because he's going to be one of the better hitters on the free agent market. And he's 30. So I think when it comes down to it, I want someone that we're going to spend over $20 million a year for to have a higher floor offensively than what Matt Chapman provides. Now, does that mean he doesn't have 30 home run potential? No, he does. And that would help this lineup a lot. Does he walk? Yes. Inconsistently, but yes, he does. And that will help this lineup. Does he play a great defensive third base? Yes. Is that something this front office would love? Absolutely. But for the price that it's probably going to be, if it's over 20 mil, if it's over the qualifying offer a year, I think I would rather those funds, and again, not my money. If they're just going to break the bank, go for it. But I don't think that that's possible. So if you're taking away however much a year, 20 to 22, 23, 24, whatever he's going to end up getting paid, AAV, that you could be spending elsewhere this offseason, and you spend it all on that, I would like a higher floor from someone getting that much money. So that leads us to other potential suitors in the free agent class. Jeimer Candelario is someone that is always going to be brought up forever, especially within this listener group, because I said after last season that I was totally fine with him getting non-tendered. I fully supported it. And then this year he went out and had one of the best seasons of his career. And that's something that this front office is going to have to live with. It's very difficult for me to quote unquote regret the decision. Like, do we remember how much he struggled in 2022? Like, no one has a crystal ball. You have the information that's in front of you. And he was a negative WAR player that had a 633 OPS in 2022. He struggled mightily, right? So, and whatever, we're not talking about what could or could not have been in 2023. We're talking about what third base is going to look like in 2024. I think for me, again, if they signed Jeimer tomorrow and it wasn't for, $1 billion a year, I'm going to be fine with it because it is going to be an upgrade over what we had at third base or what we would have been or what would have been at third base going into 2024. Okay. It's an objective upgrade. I don't need Jeimer back though. Okay. I really don't. He is 29. This will be his age 30 season. This past year, like I said, 807 OPS. But in the last 2 months of the season, struggled a little bit. September, 693 OPS, 143 average. And then a small sample size in October, 4 games, whatever, that doesn't count. But really from mid-August on, he did really, really well in May, June, and July. And then like the first week or so of August, from mid-August to the end of the season, his numbers are almost like a perfect trend down. And he got off to a slow start as well, a 708 OPS in the month of April. So Jamer, to me, is just like still Jamer. Like he didn't like reinvent the wheel. He had a good year in 2021 for the Detroit Tigers as well. He still has the same profile. He's going to walk a league average amount. He's going to strike out an average amount. He's going to run into his homers. And he still can't hit breaking balls. And that's like always been his thing and continues to be his thing. It was his kryptonite this year, even when he was doing really well. So and like, even if you're screaming at your screen or your headphones or however you're listening, and you're like, oh, this guy's such an idiot, we need Jamer back. Okay. Even if you disagree with me, okay, that's totally fine. You have the right to do that. I understand that, like, not everybody is going to agree with everybody. That's fine. That's the beauty of this conversation. My point is going to be, I don't think he's coming back because I don't know of too many times in the history of baseball where somebody has been non-tendered and then a year later the relationship's just fine and they're like, oh, well, we'll bring you back now for multiple years. We just chose to non-tender you. We just chose to let you go with a year of team control left. That's how bad he was in 2022. I don't know of too many situations where somebody gets non-tendered and then 12 months later gets a multiple year contract. That doesn't happen. So I would not hold my breath on that, even if you are a big fan of Jamer returning. Okay. So what other options are there? I've been not like super enthusiastic about the top 2 options on the board in terms of free agency. Well, debated top 2. There's somebody else we'll talk about here in a second. We will do that right after this. All right, everybody, welcome back here. Third and final segment of Locked On Tigers. I appreciate y'all for tuning in. So we've talked about Jamer. I've talked about the unlikelihood of that happening, whether you agree or disagree with me on the player. And we've talked about Matt Chapman. I know some people are really, really big, like it's Chapman or bust at third base. And I know plenty of people that see it kind of similarly to me, where it's like, yeah, it's obviously an upgrade. I'm chill with it. But I don't know. There may be a better use of allocation of funds as well, I guess, is the kind of the best way I can describe my feelings towards Chapman. But again, not my money. We have a very low payroll. Maybe break the bank a little bit. I'd be fine with it. So let's talk about some other options. In free agency, there's not too many other options, to be honest with you. I think the only other 2 that really jump out are Justin Turner and Evan Longoria. Like, maybe, right? I mean, just listing, the top third baseman in terms of WAR this past year that are free agents: Matt Chapman, Justin Turner, Jeimer Candelario, Gio Urshela, Josh Donaldson, Evan Longoria, Eduardo Escobar, Brian Anderson, Gene Segura, and then the last 4 are all negative WAR players that, like, obviously we're not going to bring in to be our starters. Okay, so like, it's shallow. It's a weak class. I'm not gonna ask to bring in Josh Donaldson or Gio Urshela. I don't need 36-year-old Eduardo Escobar, Brian Anderson. Maybe last year I kind of was like fine with him on a 1-year deal. Don't really need him this year. Gene Segura had a really rough season. So like it again gets shallow quickly. Justin Turner had a fantastic year at the plate this year: 800 OPS, 276 average, and 23 home runs. He also like didn't swing and miss very often. Still very much Justin Turner in the batter's box, right? The issue is when talking about the possibility of him playing third, he wasn't a very good defender this season, and he played a lot of first base. Played a little bit of second too, but he is definitely, this is no longer the, like, he's going to be the everyday third baseman. He played a lot of first for the Red Sox this year and was a fine defensive first baseman. The Tigers very much don't need a first baseman. And when in the few opportunities that he did have at third base, he was not good there. And I have a hard time believing that this front office, with how much they have emphasized their and expressed their wanting of everybody to be sound defensively, for this team is going to be willing to go out there and, even if it is just for 1 year, bring someone in who's going to be probably a pretty big time negative defender at third base for you. Okay. So and like, we don't need him at first, and I don't think they want to just like sign a DH. So a guy who's like a pure DH, I should say. So I kind of give and take, improvement offensively, obviously, still an improvement overall. Again, you got no production out of the position, so like we'll take it. But I just don't know the likelihood. I'd be fine with this, by the way. But if I was to put myself in the front office's shoes, I don't know if they are going to be as willing, just because of maybe the struggling of defense. But maybe if it's just a year, they can convince them. I don't know. That'll be something. I'm very interested in Justin Turner's market this free agency for that reason. But he's somebody that some people have kind of kicked around. And then Evan Longoria, in a similar sense, as far as just like a stopgap, kind of 1 year, and then figure it out net in 2025 kind of thing, figure out the long-term option. The thing with Longo is he's been on a pretty steady decline for 3 years now. 833 OPS, 766 OPS to 717 OPS. Had a sub 300 OBP this year. Struck out a lot. Yeah, like still will run into some hard hit balls and whatnot. And obviously is playing fewer games pretty consistently here at this point in his career. But man, just with the steady decline and how it's been, I can't imagine that the Tigers are going to. He doesn't really fit like to dominate the strike zone profile either. Like, it's one thing if you're 39 and you still like walk a boatload and don't strike out and like, oh, this is a Scott Harris player, but like Longo is a league average walker at best at this point in his career and strikes out over 30% of the time. Didn't play great defense, didn't play awful defense. I don't see it, but I know that some people are kind of throwing that name around as well. So, okay. So that's it for like the notable free agents. And basically we're this far in, and I have like very little great to say about this third base free agent market, which leads us to a possibility of a trade. I think the Tigers have to implore the trade market. I think they have to. I think it's vital for this offseason to be a success. I think that you have pieces. Are they super high-end pieces that are going to get you a boatload in return? No. Okay. If there was someone that was that valuable, the Tigers would hold on to them and be playing them. Right? The Tigers aren't in a position to get rid of players who have a ton of trade value. But between Badu and Manning, and I mean, then you start looking at some minor leaguers and you start going like, who is Wilmer Flores potentially on the table, right? Like, who is going to be? And I feel like if Wilmer Flores was on the table, that would happen before, because Wilmer Flores is one of the players that they have to put on the 40-man roster to protect from the Rule 5 draft this week. If that was to happen, I'd imagine it would happen before that decision would be made, so that they wouldn't just like DFA someone to make room for him and then trade him. That seems counterintuitive. So if that does happen, keep an eye out because it's going to be soon. But I feel like that's the caliber of player you're really looking at. And you're not going to trade Colt Keith. You're not going to trade Jackson Jobe. You're not going to trade like Max Clark. You can't trade yet. Like, none of those guys are going to be on the table. None of your like blue chip bigger names. I don't think Dingler can be on the market just because like you kind of need catching depth pretty badly right now. It's slim in the minors as far as like tradable pieces, not talent. The Tigers have some guys coming, but like I think pitching would probably be where you would trade because you trust your pitching development more than you ever have, and that's why I keep going back to Wilmer Flores if there was a prospect that was going to get moved. But like, what kind of caliber of third baseman does Akil Baddoo and Matt Manning give you, or like Baddoo and Wilmer Flores give you? You know what I mean? Like, is that a guy who's going to be like a starter of the future at third base? I don't know. I think that's far from a guarantee to say that, right? As much as Baddoo has great tools and I think does have trade value, he hit like under 220 this year. You're going to have to get creative with how to address third base. And I mean, actually get creative and bring someone in, not like, oh, well, that's there's not too many avenues to improve, so we're just going to stick with what we have. That's not what I'm saying. Please bring in someone else who can be in the mix at least at third base. And that leaves us to the last point, which I think is very possible. We talked about this a little bit at the end of last week. Colt Keith, for starters, I think is a second baseman for this baseball team going forward. I don't think Colt Keith is going to be the third baseman. I think there's serious concerns in the front office about his arm strength. He had an arm injury. What was that, last year? And I think there's serious concerns. The guys at Tigers Minor League Report, Raj and Chris, have done a great job covering that situation. And there's serious concerns about if he can be have a major league arm at third. So I think he's going to be the second baseman. I think he's going to be the second baseman on opening day too. So when the Tigers don't bring in anybody to play second, I think it's because the plan is Colt Keith. That leaves third open. Jace Jung. Jace Jung played third in the Arizona Fall League. And I think if the Tigers go into next year and don't address any third base at all in the offseason, they don't bring in anybody, right? I think there's a chance that the game plan is, you know what? We are going to have the McKinstry, Vierling, Ibanez, some combination of those three kind of platoon play third for the first 6 weeks of the season. We're going to see how Jace looks at third in Toledo. We're going to see if he continues hitting well. And then we're going to call up Jace Jung. And there's been some articles written about that. Our beat writers have done a good job. The Tigers fan-sided website has put out a lot of great articles about this conversation. So be sure to go support writers and go read plenty of those as well. But I think that there's a very real possibility that happens. And that's been a discussion that we've been having here for, a few months now. And I think just laying it all out there and finally just talking about third base as a whole, I think that there's a very real chance that happens just because of everything we just talked about in this episode. Is there a glaring, overwhelming, yes, this is the third baseman to go get this year in free agency? No. Is there a clear trade piece that is out there on the market? And if there was even a clear third base trade piece that was going to be your third baseman in the future, do you have the assets to bring them in without trading one of your top end blue chip prospects that the front office has made it clear they're not moving? Probably not. Get creative. I continue. If it's July or August and we're still doing the Ibanez, Vierling, McKinstry thing, I will need someone to post bail for me. I will be so frustrated. I will be so frustrated. But I do think that there's a possibility that I don't hate that Jace Jung is on this team in 2024. Let me know what y'all think. I know this was kind of all over the place, a little scatterbrained Lions victory today and all that. No, but I know that we were kind of all over the place here, so I apologize if it was hard to follow at times or if I rushed in certain places. That's on me. But I it's just because there's so many moving parts with what third base could be. It could be a free agent. Very much realistically could be a free agent. It could be Vierling, McKinstry, and Ibanez. It could be Jace Jung by June 1st, by May 20th. It could be a trade. But I think you have multiple players on your major league roster that are going to be in trade talks. Akil Baddoo, there is no way that Akil Baddoo is not going to be at least involved in trade conversations. There's no way that he's going to be able to avoid that. It's fascinating to me. And I don't think there's a clear answer, which is why I love this. And I love what I do, and I love talking about this because I want to know as many different opinions about it as possible. I want to know where y'all sit on the third base thing, who you would go after, what you think this front office is going to do, et cetera, et cetera. As we get closer to winter meetings, that's usually when trades pick up. We will have conversations about maybe potential trade targets. But for today, I'm just talking about what assets do you have even bring in some of those targets that we're talking about. I know I've got a couple of people ask me about JD Davis. there's some conversations to be had down the road as well. All right. Busy week. Busy, very fun week. I cannot wait to have much more conversations with y'all. Thanks for making Locked On Tigers your first listen every single day. Shout out to the everydayers that do tune in every day. We will be back tomorrow talking about who the Detroit Tigers are going to protect from the Rule 5 draft. All right. Peace and love. Going to therapy's dope. I'll catch y'all then, baby. Go Tigers.